In episode 3, Joe frantically takes down every one of those articles that's on his wall and throws them in the trash. All the while, he's getting text messages from this mystery person asking, "Am I right? Are all those articles about you?" At first, Joe denies it, but eventually he realizes, I just got to start ignoring this person for the time being. The next day, he goes to his class and he starts teaching, ironically, a story about a stalker who seems to be obsessed with their victim. As the class is arguing the meaning of this, word gets out that Malcolm's finger was found. It was actually sent to the police by whoever killed him. And the note said, "This is not a kidnapping, this is a murder." Joe now knows that whoever this person is, they didn't keep the pinky as a trophy. They kept it to force him to play this game. He reaches out to the person and says, "What do you want?" And they say, "Admit you're Joe Goldberg." He simply writes, "I'm not, but if I was, what would you want from me?" And they send back, "For starters, why'd you kill all those people? By the way, I should mention, I still have Simon's ear. Shall I send with a note signed Jonathan Moore?" Joe's panicking a little bit at this point, and he texts back, "If I had done those things, they could have only been because I had no other option." He then overhears one of his students, Edward, gossiping with a few other students. Edward's dad works in the newspaper, so he gets some inside information. That's one of the reasons why so many students are asking him about the situation. But when Nadia hears them joking about it, she storms up and yells at them for joking about someone dying. She's way more invested in this than a student normally would be about their teacher being murdered. It seems like a personal connection with her. Joe doesn't have time, though, to intervene. He has to find out who this mystery murderer is. As he eagerly awaits this person to send him another text message, he notices that Kate is talking to the police. He then gets caught by her, staring at her from his window. And she decides to send the police over to him because, after all, he was the last person to see Malcolm alive. As we know at this point, Joe is very, very good at this sort of thing. He plays himself off as innocent, and the police buy his story. He also points the finger at somebody else. He brings up the fact that Malcolm told him he found out Simon was stealing art. He makes it sound like Malcolm was ready to blackmail Simon because of this. And he gives the police Blue's name in order to corroborate the story. Once the police do leave, he gets a message from the murderer. They make a comment about how Kate sent the police right to him. And he immediately goes over to his window because he knows the person must be close, but he doesn't see anything. He then gets a follow-up message that says Kate's a threat. Life or death, one might say. You should take care of her. And now Joe thinks that the next target might be Kate, and he goes into protective mode. He puts on his jacket and heads over to her apartment, and he's surprised because Nadia is standing outside. They do the awkward, "What are you doing here?" And Nadia fesses up to having slept with Malcolm. She went to the apartment because she tried to sneak in. She wrote him a letter, and she wants it back. She doesn't want it found. It's got a lot of personal information in there. Joe doesn't judge her for any of this, just telling her, "I know Kate a little bit. I can get your letter for you, don't worry." After sending Nadia on her way, Joe heads to the funeral services for Simon. There's a lot of paparazzi outside this thing. And Joe is really the only person that they don't recognize who doesn't seem to belong. The paparazzi aren't the only ones that feel this way. Kate also wants to know why he's there. She storms up to him in the church and demands to know what he's doing there, and he says, "I was invited by Phoebe." What he's really doing there, though, is trying to figure out which one of these people is actually the murderer. The more he looks around the room, though, the more he realizes it could be any of them. They all fit the description in one way or the other. He continues doing his reconnaissance at the luncheon when he's approached by Vic. Vic makes it known that he does not trust him. He finds everything about Joe super shady. So now on top of the murderer, Joe's got to deal with this guy. A short while later, the luncheon wraps up. Joe heads out, and he sees Kate waiting for an Uber and decides to chat her up, saying, "I'm sorry, we seem to have gotten off on the wrong foot." But Kate is still super cold to Joe. She also has no interest in talking to him, so she stops waiting for the car and just decides to walk home. And Joe follows her. He follows her all the way to a pub where he decides to go in and sit next to her. He once again apologizes to her, trying to smooth things over with her, but she's the ice queen. He hints at the fact that this must be a tough time for her because any one of her friends could be the killer, but she hasn't even thought about that. She thinks that it could be any one of the thousands of people that would love to see rich people die. The conversation continues to get hostile until all of a sudden it just turns on a dime. Kate goes from not wanting to talk to Joe at all to revealing that when she was a little girl, her mother suppressed her emotions. It's probably why she's so cold. She then wants to show Joe something, which he finds incredibly ironic because she was just yelling at him for, quote, stalking her. She leads him all the way to a secret garden, and that's where she comes onto him. Because your boyfriend getting murdered and his pinky getting sent to the police is nature's most powerful aphrodisiac. While Joe knows that he shouldn't, he gives in anyway. Him and Kate hook up right then and there in the secret garden, but they're not alone. Because Vic was following them, and Vic was watching all of this. Joe goes home with Kate that night and actually sleeps over her apartment. He wakes up before she does, and that's when he goes into detective mode trying to find Nadia's letter. He does find it, but he gets caught by Kate. It forces him to come clean about the reason he's snooping around, although he never uses Nadia's real name. None of this comes as a surprise to Kate. She knew that Malcolm was cheating on her. What Kate's more upset about is the fact that she feels used, like Joe came home with her just to find this letter, so she kicks him out. But Joe continues to keep a close eye on her apartment. As he's doing this, he gets a message from the murderer that says, "I've been watching you, quote, protect her. I figured you out. I think you kill to protect the things you love. Kate's not love yet, but she did help me see your pattern. You like it, how it feels to kill." Joe texts the person back saying, "You're insane." And they respond saying, "I'll show you." He then hears Kate leave and he follows her, all the way to Malcolm's family crypt. She starts talking to Malcolm, or the empty crypt that he will be in once they find the body, and Joe, all the while, is watching this from afar. But once Kate leaves, Joe is caught by Vic, who has him at gunpoint. Vic starts frisking Joe, looking for anything he can find because he wants to know what Joe is up to. And what he thinks is Joe is the murderer and Kate is the next victim. Joe tries to tell Vic that that's not the case, but then Vic finds something. It was Malcolm's pinky ring, and Joe literally has no idea how it got in his possession. He starts quickly thinking about how he could have gotten in possession of it, and there was a guy that bumped into him at the funeral. There was a group of girls that he passed by, but honestly, it could have been anything. This pinky ring, though, is trouble. He's got to silence Vic, and the two start getting into a fight where Joe prevails, ultimately killing him. Even though he proved this person right by killing again, he also proved them wrong because he didn't get off on it. He hated it. He now has to dispose the body, which he does. He writes Phoebe a letter as Vic saying that he's resigning from the job, and then he heads home. As soon as he sits down on his couch, he gets a text message from the person saying, "I was right. You liked it, didn't you?" And he screams at the phone, "No, I didn't." But then he gets an idea. This person might actually want to team up with Joe. They might be lonely. So go along with it. He texts the person back. It was exhilarating. And what he's hoping is this person wants to meet him in real life. The person doesn't respond. And the next day when he wakes up, he's still waiting for a response, while also keeping tabs on Kate to make sure she's safe. He watches her rip out a Malcolm portrait and burn it in her apartment. While it's burning, she looks up and she sees that Joe is watching. He hears his phone buzz, but it's not the murderer. It's actually Phoebe. She needs to meet him at Sundry House ASAP. And when he goes to leave, he can't because he gets a knock at the door and it's Nadia. He gives her the letter that he found, reassuring her that he didn't read it. And then they have a quick conversation about relationships, death, the grieving process, all that. Once Nadia leaves, he feels his phone buzz again, and this time it is the murderer. And his trap has worked. They message him saying, "I think it's time for us to meet." And he responds on one condition: leave Kate alone. She's mine. He then heads off to Sundry House, where he's surprised because everybody's there. And everybody is staring at him, arms crossed, looking accusatory. And that's when the police show up saying, "Can we talk to you for a moment?" And now he's definitely concerned. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.